Hi, I'm Ann Ridelfs. I'm an author, public speaker, and gardener of the human soul. On the last episode of my show, I talked about the great divide that is developing in my country, the United States, and how this reflects the division in the souls of most of the residents here. And today I have on my show Deborah Chelette Wilson, who's going to be joining me today to discuss this important topic of the division of the soul. Welcome, Deborah.
Welcome. I'm glad to be here.
And you have quite an amazing resume as far as all that you have done and all that you do. This woman has written 17 books. She's a public speaker. She's the host of her own online TV program. She's a bass fisherwoman. She's a trauma therapist, and she's an artist. She's made jewelry, which we're wearing today. What am I leaving out, Deborah?
Well, I'm just a person.
Well, you're an exceptional person, and I think one that exemplifies what I'm talking about, that when we lose aspects of ourselves, we lose abilities, gifts, talents, and as we regain the lost parts of ourselves, we regain our gifts, our talents, our abilities. So you want to tell us a little bit about how you became who you are today?
Well, about 7 years ago, I'll start there. I had, I guess you could say, an identity crisis. I had gotten to a point to where a lot of things hadn't worked out for me like I had thought they were going to.
It's not the truth.
And I began to feel myself becoming a very bitter, angry woman, which was not on my bucket list or my to-do list or any list. And that was a wake-up call for me. Of course, it came out of some very difficult experiences that I had as a counselor in facing some of the cases I had that required me having to testify in court, and that's not always a fun experience. But what that experience brought for me was the realization that even though things didn't work out like I had thought they should, like I didn't get the outcome I wanted, that I had been doing something very significant that I had lost track of, and that I had been living consistently with the values of my soul.
Nice.
And I started really looking at that and taking stock and realizing too that a lot of the traumatic experiences I had as a child and as a young woman, not only in places that should have been safe, but even in the workforce, those things hadn't gone away, even though I was able to kind of put them aside. But I think that they began to cover up the connection that I had felt with my soul, my creativity, the compassionate side of myself, my desire to be all that I could be, that God has made me to be. I began to get, that part of me began to get covered over. It's kind of like I began an archaeological dig about 7 years ago. And what I found were the treasures of the person who I was that had not been acknowledged as a young girl. And I just took those same patterns and did them to myself over my life, my adult life. And so I began to strip those away and, dig deep down inside of me and heal a lot of the traumas that it's not that I hadn't worked on them, or it isn't that I hadn't gone to therapy or done my own work, but many things were left out because in our society, we're very cognitive in how we approach things, even therapy, but that leaves out the emotional part of who we are. And when you have an experience, you not only experience it physically, but you experience it emotionally, cognitively, and spiritually. So all levels of who we are affected by our experiences for good or ill. And when you have a lot of traumatic experiences, that kind of keeps you frozen. And especially when you're a child, growing up through your childhood and you're experiencing multiple traumas, it makes things very, very complex in order to begin to deal with them as an adult. And there's just so many layers that we seem in our culture, it seems like we just want the surfacey stuff. We just, want a quick fix, or we don't want to look at anything at all, or we just want to go on to the next big thing instead of stopping, pausing, and really digging deep down in our own archaeological self, so to speak.
I love the metaphor. That's nice.
Yeah.
All the treasures you can find.
Yeah. Well, I had an opportunity to go do some archaeological.
That too?
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
On a site. And it was just amazing, the things that human beings leave behind that tell us so much about people who came before us. And so that just kind of stuck with me. And as I've done my own healing work, it's like, that's how it feels, like I'm just going deeper and deeper and getting rid of the residues of traumas that they need to be dealt with on multiple levels, not just cognitively. I mean, I could talk about it till the cows came home, but it wasn't healing me in my body. Mm-hmm. It wasn't healing my emotions, and it was keeping me from connecting and reconnecting with my soul. That had been very important to me. I felt that connection as a child, but over time, I began to kind of lose that the contact that I had with it. And that's become very precious to me. Well, as a matter of fact, I did a painting that illustrated that experience for me, that there were all these storms in my life, but the soul of who I am, I kept down safe, safe away from all of that. Or maybe it kept me safe. I'm not sure which one, but.
And don't you think that's what life is about? Meaning we have these areas where we're frozen or even absent, and life is trying to maneuver us back into those parts of ourselves. Mm-hmm. So if I'm not willing to feel my emotions, I might have these just devastating circumstances to force me into my grief, to force me into my anguish, to force me into fears, in order to make all that conscious, and I become a bigger person by including these things in my life. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think our body talks to us, and in our illnesses. And, I used to have a lot of migraine headaches, and I really feel like I
had migraines too.
Yeah. And one of my doctors gave up on me about my allergies. He said, I can't do anything else for you. So I quit taking all the medicine, and I started doing other kinds of healing work, internal work. And, I don't have those same kind of issues every now and then, but,
Can you share what was manifesting as allergies?
Well, it was just feeling very weak, confused, not able to focus. And of course, stress brings that on. And I've always been in stressful jobs, it seems like. I was a firefighter and an EMT, worked in emergency room. So, there was, it seemed to bring that stuff to me. It was kind of like, I guess that was, you could say, a reflection of my traumas.
Yes.
Was that I dealt with trauma. And so I'm well versed in trauma and dealing with it and helping other people deal with it. I just never really thought of it like that when I was going through it. I didn't realize that really, to me, every experience I have is reflecting something to me if I will pay attention to it. Or other people what's going on in other people's lives, it's also an opportunity for me to learn from them, and then I don't have to do that, what they're going through.
And do you find these can be our long lost parts? Like if I don't do anger, which has been my mm-hmm. history, I attract a lot of angry people to me to mm-hmm. show me what's deep inside me and needs to be released.
Right. So for me, it makes life very exciting, because it's like I can learn from everyone that I meet. They can learn from me. I mean, I don't know. That's a win-win. Don't have too many of those around.
True.
But for me, that's a win-win. kind of, and to me, that's, if we don't all win, then nobody's going to win, because we all impact each other in subtle ways, and ways we know or ways we don't know. And so if one person's losing, then the rest of us are in some way or some form. And I think that's pretty obvious if you look around in the world and you see what's going on.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier outcome or income too. We may not get the income we want.
Yeah.
But it made me think of, I had an encounter with someone recently, and he was advising me about something, and it was wonderful, just caring, kind advice. And I afterwards said, do I owe you something? And he said, if you implement what I've said and you come back in a few months and tell me how it's changed your life for the good, he said, that will mean more to me than if you write me a check right now. He said the emotional value of that would just be so rich. I was touched by that, because so few people think in terms of emotional income, mental income, spiritual income.
Yeah, relationships.
Relational. And I used to date a man that walked around, when he saw people he hadn't seen in a while, he said, I have a relationship. And it touched me so much, because he spoke of it like we in America would say, I have a new car, or look at my big house. It was so important to him, and I love that.
Yeah. See, I also understand that if you've been hurt in relationships as a child that should have been helpful to you and loving and kind, then it makes it difficult to begin, to be able to connect with people on that kind of level. Animals become easier, things become easier to kind of connect with as your bonding object, which is sad, because in our culture we look at who's got what and who's doing what, and a lot of times the way that people act that out is very harmful to each other. And relationships are the heart of humanity. We're designed to be in relationships. And one of the things that I guess motivates me a lot in what I do, and in keeping doing it and making sure I don't burn out is children. I mean, I remember being a child, and I remember what it was like for me. And so the children that I've worked with over the years have taught me, and in a way they validated my own experience as a child, that adults really didn't understand me. They misunderstood me. They judged me in ways that were not really accurate. And we're still doing that to kids. And that's just not okay with me. And so that's one of the things I would like to see, where children in the world really are able to be children and to get their emotional needs met. I mean, in a way, even people in poverty in our country, they have their basic needs met physically. Maybe a roof over their head, it may not be all that great, but it's, those kinds of things are done, but the emotional needs are not met. And those last a lifetime and creates, again, the debris, if you will, that cover people over in their lives from being able to connect to that soulful part of themselves, their genius and their brilliance. I mean, I've worked with kids who were diagnosed as mentally retarded, and they weren't. They were traumatized. Yeah, they were traumatized. You can't go to school ready to learn if some of the kids that they told me in these little rural communities, I didn't even expect to find some of the things that I've encountered with kids that they're going through, where they would tell me, well, we had to sleep on the floor last night because there was shooting going on in the apartment complex.
Wow.
Yeah.
And also there's so many forms of intelligence, and if our schools are just documenting a few of those forms and ignoring other forms like musical brilliance, artistic brilliance, etc., emotional brilliance, they're not getting the recognition.
Well, and the research shows that emotional IQ, emotional quotient, makes more of a difference than IQ. Because if you can't get along with people, why do people get fired from their jobs? or they don't stay at a job is because of some human interaction that they're not able to deal with emotionally. And that's because, well, as far as I'm concerned, we're child developmentally illiterate and emotionally illiterate in this country, and we're trauma illiterate. And there's no reason for that, because there's plenty of research, there's plenty of information out there that speaks to all these things that would be helpful for people to know.
Absolutely.
And implement.
And as we're talking about children and different people mirroring aspects of ourselves that we don't know, so many kids are mirroring the inner children of their parents, and the parents don't have a clue. They don't appreciate the clear image that the kids are showing them.
Yeah, that's why when I see children, I work with the parents to help them understand how to deal with the behavior in their child that really, they're coming from an old paradigm of parenting practices that aren't working anymore. Maybe they did at one time. I've, got my own opinions about that. But, I'll just say that it's not working now for kids. They really need their parents more than I think sometimes their parents really realize. Because to me, children need to be put first. We need to be mature enough emotionally, and I think soulfully, to realize the preciousness of this human life that's in our hands, and to be all of who we can be, and to be connected to all of who we are, so that we can be a safe place and a safe developmental place for them, where we understand that at certain ages kids do certain things, and it's not because they're just trying to make you have a bad day.
Yeah. I just wish more people pursued the inner journey and picked up the pieces of themselves, because from that wholeness, they know how to embrace and nurture the wholeness of their child, when most parents will sever their kid into pieces, just as what was done to them. And they don't even realize what they're doing, psychologically speaking.
Right. And that's true. I know that there were times in my life when I did feel like that the pieces of who I was just laid shattered at my feet, and I didn't know what to do with them, because it's so devastating to sometimes to connect with these things. And that's kind of the hard work, or the part of the difficulty, but to me, it's the most difficult work I've learned to love, because of what I've reaped from it, and how I feel now versus how I used to feel, even in my body. I was not even a happy camper in my body, because it was always shaking and it was inflamed, and I was having to take medication, $150 a month for a while.
And I think inflammation is an expression of that anger we keep inside. The very word means anger. When someone's inflamed, they're angry.
Well, and I had plenty of reason to feel that way, but it's not like it's great. That I was able to realize that I felt that way, but I didn't need to hold on to it. And that's the thing, is we don't really have safe enough places or safe enough people that are like islands of safety.
I love that expression.
Yeah, to be understanding and caring, and recognize that so much of what we take personal isn't personal. It's that other person struggling with what's happened to them in a society that I don't think really understands the impact of trauma, let alone how to deal with it. At least that's what I've heard from the clients that I've worked with, and from my own experience. And
yet we're supposed to be an advanced civilization. And this is one thing about labels. You always have to ask where, advanced in what areas, because certainly technologically, yes.
We are technologically, but
psychologically, no.
No, our technology actually, I think, stresses us out psychologically a lot more than what we realize, because we get into all the fun about it. But there's a responsibility that comes with everything, I think, and even technology. And, what is driving just because you can do something, does it mean that you have to do it? That's the question I ask myself sometimes. Just because I can do this, is it really a good idea? I remember when I was a teenager and kids were trying to get me to do things their way or whatever. I would say something like that. I said, I don't have to do that. And they would ask me, well, why? Why don't you want to come smoke this pot or whatever it was that they were asking me? I said, because I don't have to do anything that I don't want to do. Besides that, if you're going to go jump off a cliff, you want me to go jump off with you? I don't think so.
And I think the more we have access to all the different parts of ourselves, the more we have clarity in what to do.
Yes.
But we start severing away I don't need emotions. That's a feminine thing, like some men believe.
Oh, yeah.
Or, I'm going to be a wife and mother. I don't need a brilliant mind. So we sever that away. It gets me into trouble. Sever, spirituality. Oh, that's your choice. We sever that away. We just become so small. We lose our instrumentation that tells us, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I have my soul is my inner GPS when I stay connected to it. And when I don't, then I go down rabbit trails and ditches and things like that.
Don't we all?
So, I can really remember as a teenager, I was so fed up with how I had been treated for so long. I was like, I wasn't listening to anybody, not even that still small voice inside of me that had guided me as a child and a young teenager. And I was like, I'm going to do, so my ego got in there, and it's like, we're going to do it my way. Well,
but it's also developmental.
Yeah, it's very developmental.
Forced to follow someone else's will, you're going to rebel by being willful sooner or later.
I did.
Until you get the even balance of now's the time to be obedient, now's the time to do it my way.
Yeah. And I learned a lot. It wasn't pleasant experiences. I just kind of started repeating patterns that I'd learned in my childhood and didn't treat myself very well. So self-care has become very important to me, and honoring who I am, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of me, all of who I am. And that includes my soul. And as I've embraced, my experiences and what's happened to me, and, I'm still growing through them. And I have this big, huge slinky. It's about this big around, and it's taller than me. And I think of that as my development, my human development, that I cycle, up this spiral, becoming more aware of my parts, the parts that I've written off and haven't looked at, and all those little pieces of me, and putting them back together. And each time that I do that, I'm spiraling upward, really, or inward, really. I think it's more inward sometimes than upward. Is spiraling inward, healing those things inside of me, and it's reconnecting more clearly to my soul.
But don't you think it goes in all directions? As far as spiraling inward is the feminine, and spiraling outward is the masculine.
Right.
We need both.
Yeah.
And the more we grow in all sides of ourselves, the more we are just able to go in all directions at any time as needed.
It's interesting that you would mention the feminine and the masculine, because I think about that as a divine marriage within each one of us. And not like the first marriage I had, for sure, but but it's the integrating, as I've integrated the hurts that I've had in my life, and it's bringing me back to this place of recognizing what's within me, and like you say, it's the masculine and feminine as I bring them together. And I was thinking about this the other day. It's like, because I've mentally fought men, not physically, but mentally in some ways. And my husband's told me about that. So now I know he's right. But I realized that it's like, really, I'm mentally fighting myself, because I have visions of the things that I want to do. And it's not that I haven't accomplished some of them, but it's the vision that to me is the feminine, is the vision of where I want to go. And and I need to nurture, and I keep nurturing my visions. But sometimes it's like, when are we going to manifest? Well, that's what the masculine part of me, all those little detailed
Yes.
steps, that's where I need to shift over to, okay, this is the vision. Now, how do we do that? What do we need to do to create that? And that's kind of exciting to get that more clear for myself than even now, and really begin to integrate that together. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's pretty exciting.
Well, you've done a lot inside and outside, so it lets me know you've got a good marriage.
Well, I'm much happier with myself, that's for sure, than I was I guess it's 7 years ago now.
Well, I really have enjoyed talking with you. Anything else you want to share with the viewers
this has
today?
been fun. Yeah. Oh, I'd like to give yourself the gift of getting acquainted with your real self and your soulful self, and do the work you need to do. You'll be glad you did.
And I always like to end with a gardening tip. So today, look at who in your life might be mirroring something that you need to get in touch with on the inside. Anything else you want to say?
No, that's great. I'm done. It's been fun.
Happy gardening.